It's the all-American clash between Hikaru Nakamura with the white pieces and Fabiano Caruana. Hikaru opens the game with 1 d4, knight f6, c4, e6, and we have the Nimzo Indian on the board. This is the same opening that they played in classical chess, which is now being played in Armageddon. Takes, d5, and here Hikaru had played queen f3, but now goes cd, bishop f1, rook f1, and both the players making moves at rapid pace. This is all preparation. Hikaru has 10 minutes when the game began, and Fabiano has 7 minutes, but a draw would mean Fabiano goes through and wins this match. Now queen e2, the main idea could be to push the pawn to c4 or e4. So knight a5 is played, taking into control the c4 square. One idea for white is to play king f2 to g1, and that would be a nice maneuver, an artificial castling. The other idea that could be played here is to push the central pawn to e4. There's also queen d3, improving the position of the queen. Hikaru goes e4 and Fabiano offers a trade of queens. He takes the queen, knight takes, and now bishop goes to g5. So white does have a very strong center, but black's knight is beautifully placed on c4. It's not so easy to remove it from that square. Bishop g5, maybe he threatens to take here. If he can get the king up to d3 and attack the knight, that's also possible. Knight d7 played now by Caruana. And Hikaru now can play a4, because then black's idea at some point is a6, b5, so he can preempt it. He can also go king e2, king d3, which would be an interesting idea there. He plays king e2. He improves the position of the king. And now black, what does Fabiano do? Well, I think he can go for this plan with a6 and b5. He castles first, connects his rooks. Generally in such positions, you want to keep your king in the center. But with the bishop cutting across this diagonal, it was better to just castle it out. And now Hikaru once again is slightly uncomfortable here. Not mainly because his position is worse, but because he's in a must-win situation. And when you are in a must-win, you kind of try to do more with your position than what is possible. He goes rook a to b1. And Caruana now has 5 minutes 58 seconds. Hikaru has 8 minutes 29 seconds. Plays his pawn to a6. And you can see that Caruana wants to go b5. Maybe a4 is possible here. And trying to stop b5 could be an idea. For now, Hikaru is thinking. Also, if king d3 could be a possible idea, but then black just pushes the pawn to b5. White's beautiful center is not really moving yet, so rook d1 played. I think Hikaru has in mind to push the pawn to d5. That's why he's brought his rook into the center of the board, and now black is going to play pawn to b5. I think that's his idea. Yes, he pushes his pawn to b5 and he wants to get his knight here. Maybe then the knight comes to a4, attacking the weakened c3 pawn. Black's knights are working perfectly in unison here. What is Hikaru going to do next? He needs to somehow exchange these knights. So maybe knight f1 to e3 could be a good idea. But then again, when you play knight f1, black is anyway going to come to b6. And when you play knight e3, he would trade and bring the other knight. So Hikaru pushes the pawn to d5. And in the center, he's trying to kind of create play. If you take here, he would want to take with the knight. There's also a possibility of bringing his knight into the position. So these are some possibilities that Hikaru has thought about. And Caruana taking his time because it's the critical moment of the game. He can play e5, but then the knight jumps in. So instead, he plays knight b6, a fantastic move. He's okay with the fact that his pawn structure will get slightly ruined, but at the same time, his knights are wonderfully positioned here. Also, the black knight can jump to a4 and put pressure on c3. What will Hikaru do next? Because all of a sudden, a4 is impossible. His pawn in the center could become very weak. For example, if black can take, Suddenly a check comes in here, and what is the king doing on e2? So Hikaru has some questions to answer, and I think the most logical thing to do is to take on e6 and then move your knight to f1 to e3. That would make a lot of sense. But then again, you have to win on demand, and that is not easy. Time is in Hikaru's favor right now. He has 7 minutes 30 seconds. He's taken some time for this move already. And now thinking a bit, what are the other moves possible here? Maybe one is bishop f4 to attack c7. He takes on e6, fe6, quickly replied by Fabiano. King e1, a terrible move. It's a huge blunder here by Hikaru. Knight f1, knight e3 was much better, but with king e1, all of a sudden you can see that knight a4 now attacking here would be very strong. He goes at 6. Bishop comes back to c1. All of white pieces are on the last rank here. And now knight a4 could become pretty strong, or you can bring your rook in the center of the board. He brings his rook to d8. Excellent play here by Caruana. All he needs is a draw. You can see Hikaru shaking his head. He's like, what have I done? You know, it's just completely terrible position. But one mustn't just get fooled by Hikaru's shaking of head. Deep within, he is calculating. He plays f4, which is an ambitious move. He wants to play e5 and he wants to bring his knight to e4. Caruana jumps knight a4. The knight comes back to e2. And now he comes to c5 with the idea of attacking e4 and also a check on d3. So the knights are creating massive havoc here. And what is Hikaru going to do next now? He's utterly lost. He's in big trouble. And he has more time on the clock, but that is not going to be sufficient. He goes knight to g3, defending the pawn for the time being. But what about the check? And then the f4 pawn hanging. But it's not so easy. Look at this. If you play knight d3 check, I go king e2, and you can no longer take here, because after bishop f4, if you take here, I take here, you take here, I'm going to get a lot of play with rook d7. So that's the reason why Caruana goes knight a4 and tries to attack here. He doesn't give this check. He goes to a4. He tries to attack the pawn. In order to defend it, you don't want to play a move like rook b3. So knight comes back, knight c5, and he had to play e5, because although black's position is completely better, Hikaru can't agree to a draw. He has to play for a win. Now comes a check, king f1, and a good move now is to play knight c e5, and you're just a pawn up, because this pawn is pinned here. Will Caruana find this move? Well, he first plays c5, taking away the d4 square, and also an excellent move. King g1, instantly Hikaru moves his king away. You can see why Hikaru is one of the best defenders in the world, because even though his position is so bad, he will play it move to move. What is the best move here? Rook f1, the best move in the position. Although he's right now struggling, he's slightly improved his position with the rook coming to f1. Knight takes c1 played, rook takes c1, and rook comes into d2. So finally, the activity has led to the gain of material. I think Caruana can safely chop off this pawn on a2. On knight e3 is also possible. He takes on a2. That's a good move. And now Hikaru goes knight e4. So he's trying to move in with his knight, looking at these squares. c5 is hanging, so you have to be careful there. How are you going to deal with this is the question. And Caruana has 3 minutes 24 seconds. So all of a sudden the game gets tense. Hikaru has 4 minutes 30 seconds. Some chances there. The powerful defender that Hikaru Nakamura is. Will Caruana go rook c8 and try to defend it passively? But then you might have to think about a rook entering. Well, there's knight e3. So I think he could do that, but he goes knight e3 straight away. Rook f2 played, takes, king takes, and now he would love to take this pawn, but the knight is hanging, so the knight has to move away. and where would the knight move to? I guess knight to d5 seems like a logical move there. He plays knight to c4, and now Hikaru can take the c5 pawn, but there's rook f4, so maybe g3. He plays king g3, and now the rook comes to c8, defending the c5 pawn. Hikaru Nakamura doing really well here. Maybe the best position he has had in several moves. Although he's worse, but he still now has a real chance, because Fabi is down to 2 minutes 20 seconds. Caruana has 4 minutes, and Fabi has struggled with time here. Knight comes to e3. This time king f3 seems like a powerful move. Then you can slowly start mobilizing your kingside pawns. And what is here Hikaru going to play? He goes king f3, knight to d5, rook a1 played, attacking the a6 pawn. Rook comes to c6, defending a6, and now comes g4. So he pushes the pawn, and maybe he wants to go f5 next. That's the plan. And Caruana finds the best move. c4 is such a fantastic move, because while white is getting his pawns rolling, Caruana finally gets his pawns rolling. He goes b4, and this was very important, because if he would not have gotten this play, he would have been in trouble there. Now c3, c2, followed by knight takes b4 and knight a2. Very strong ideas there in the position. And how does Hikaru now continue? He still has to weave some kind of threats. Caruana has 1 minute 50 seconds, so he can go wrong. He can go wrong here. It's not so simple. Hikaru pushes the pawn to b5. He's actually playing this bit like roulette. He's saying that, you know, the a file is open. I have my knight here. I have these pawns. Somehow I should be able to create a mating attack. So let's say check, king h7, and f6 could be an idea. gf, ef, but this c2, c1 is just too powerful. It's just too powerful there. He goes for a check, and now king Caruana thinking a bit. King f7 would be a mistake because of knight d6 check, and white is really doing well. King h7, he plays knight d6. So while Hikaru is angling for knight f7 and rook h8 mate, Caruana attacks the rook first, knight b6, and next up he has c2, c1 coming in. So rook goes to e8. It's time to push the pawn. Just making sure everything's fine. He pushes c2, knight f7, and the final move rook c8, stopping the mate. Hikaru smiling and resigns. Fabiano Caruana wins the Armageddon and wins the match, gets 1.5 points. Hikaru, who was leader of the tournament, is now slips down to second position as Magnus Carlsen moves up. But very nice game by Caruana.